This is Megan Jones welcoming you to the latest ICEA Greater Alabama chapter meeting and presentation. I would like to introduce Dr. Christian Smart, ICEA's Vice President of Professional Development and the Acting President for the Greater Alabama chapter, who's going to say a few words before our presentation today. Christian?
Yes, well, welcome everyone. Thanks, Megan. So I just want to mention a few things. I think the national board elections are currently ongoing. Be sure to vote if you're a member. You still have time to vote there. Correct me if I'm wrong there, Megan. A few other things of interest. If you're interested in taking the exams, the certification exams, either the PCEA or the CCEA, they are now both offered online, an online exam. If you want to do some preparation, CBOC is probably the best way to do that. There is now, you can access the latest version, the beta version of CBOC, if you're a member, through the ICEA website, the beta version of 2.0. And on the 2.0 website now, the 2.0 beta version, you can now do a practice exam. You can download an HTML file to do practice exams by module, or just entire all the different practice questions that are out there. It's pretty much basically taking everything that's in CBOC and just putting it into an easy to use format that you can practice with all in one place. So it's pretty nice. The May workshop is fast approaching. That's coming up. There's still time to sign up for that. There'll be, I think, 48 presentations there, along with some keynote speakers, as well as some virtual networking events. So that's good. And then for September, we're planning to have a training summit, which will going to offer the CBOC training, as well as SKIBOC, which is our new software cost estimating body of knowledge. We are still in development, in the end stages of development of that. We will be ready to present that this fall. Eventually, we will have a standalone sort of add-on certification. You don't necessarily have to be a CCEA to become software cost estimating certified, but it does build upon the CBOC. It's not completely separate from CBOC. It's basically everything you need to know in addition to CBOC to be a good software cost estimator. So that's in development. We're very excited about that product. There's really nothing that is out there that's like it, even in other organizations that are not focused on defense and aerospace like ICEA. There's really no out there. So we think this will have a broad application, will bring people into the organization. The other thing I'll mention is that we are doing some preparation. It's intended to be sort of supplemental to CBOC. The Greater Alabama chapter is starting this Thursday some certification prep classes. It's not standalone. It's kind of a supplement to CBOC. We've got several classes lined up, and then over the next several weeks. And the first thing that we'll start with is kind of the general overview, how to recognize a cost estimate if we're to bite you in the behind kind of class. And then we'll build from there, talk about software, estimating risk, learning curves, and a variety of other topics. So there's still time to sign up for that. Be sure to do that. And if you're interested, you can shoot me an email or shoot Megan an email. There's can get you the information that you need to sign up. It's free. There's no charge for that. It's going to be offered on Thursdays between 3 and 5 p.m. Central Daylight Time. It starts this Thursday. So that's kind of the latest goings on that we have with the chapter and nationally for ICEA. And I'd like to turn it over to Joe Hamaker. Joe Hamaker is the director for NASA and Department of Defense programs at Galbraith Federal. Joe's a longtime member of ICEA and predecessor organizations like SKIA and ISPA. He was 2004, he's awarded the Frank Fryman Lifetime Achievement Award from the International Society of Parametric Analysts. He's former director of cost analysis at NASA, and it says a slew of other achievements, too many to mention right here, but I think those are enough to kind of give you a sense of Joe's great degree of experience and expertise. And he's going to talk to you today about a internal small satellite cost model that Galbraith has developed that he calls Gizmo. So with that, I'll turn it over to Joe.
Thanks, everyone, for the opportunity to talk to you today about the Gallup Internal Small Satellite Cost Model, which we affectionately call Gizmo. The only thing on this chart that I want to mention is my contact information at the bottom, jhammaker@galrath.com. So if you have any constructive criticism on what you see today, please send it to me. We welcome your comments or even destructive criticism. That'll be fine too. So don't hold back. Okay, I'm going to cover these topics today. I'm going to do a little bit of bottom line up front on one chart to try to set the stage. I'm going to tell you what I'm calling a small satellite. Then I'm going to talk about the model, Gizmo, talking about its database, its work breakdown structure, the structure of the CERs, show you an example scatter plot, and show you a table of independent variables that we attempted to use, some successfully and some not. I'll show you how we did the regression, an example CER, and then we're handling percent new design in a new way. I'm saying it's new. Maybe other people have done what I'm going to show you before and I'm not aware of it, but I'll show you how we're handling percent new design in a novel way. I'll show you the Gizmo I/O and show you some sensitivities to some of the drivers when you twist the knobs, and then wrap it up. Okay, so the bottom line up front, we've recently been involved, we Gallup have recently been involved in estimating small satellites for a number of customers. We've successfully used SEER-H, our main product SEER-H and SEER-Space quite effectively to estimate the cost of small sats. But because we'd like to employ multiple models as a cross-check, we decided we might need another database, another model to cross-check SEER-H and SEER-Space, to give both ourselves and our customers confidence that we're getting good results. So we developed this small satellite cost model and database. And to be clear here, we've got the I in the title because it's really for internal Gallup use only. We're not marketing this model. We'll be happy to use the model to estimate any small sats that you have, but we're not trying to sell this model. The database currently is 67 small satellites, both old and new. We're trying to get some others, but that's where we stand today. And the CERs were developed using classical regression analysis, except for percent new design, and I'll show you how we did that. We don't have a GUI, it's just all in Excel, and so that's what this presentation is all about. So what is a small satellite? Well, in our definition here today, I'm using a NASA definition. And NASA, at least one place, calls a small satellite a satellite with a wet mass of 180 kilograms or less. And I've got an asterisk there, so you can go down to the bottom of the chart and follow that link to see that. Of course, as cost analysts, we normally think more in terms of dry mass. Well, as it turns out, the wet mass to dry mass ratios for satellites ranges from 1 to 5. And that comes out of another reference at the bottom of the chart. But when I look at our own internal Gallup data, the mean wet to dry ratio seems to be a lot less than that upper limit of 5. In fact, it's around 1.3. Okay, so thus the NASA 180 kilograms wet mass translates into a minimum dry mass of 36 kilograms if you assume that 5 times factor, or 180 kilograms if you assume, if we're talking about a satellite that has no propulsion. Using the 1.3 mean number, by the way, wet dry ratio implies that 180 kilograms wet would be about 138 kilograms dry. So that's kind of the ranges that we're talking about here. Now our database happens to, it's close to that. It has a minimum mass of about 30 kilograms. The lightest or least massive satellite in our database is 30 kilograms dry. The median is 250 kilograms, and the maximum is about 500 kilograms. So we think our model, this is a little subjective, what I'm about to say, but we think our model is should comfortably cover the 36 kilogram to 180 kilogram range. We do have some points over 250, so hopefully they're not pulling the cost estimates up. We still start looking at that. Yeah, we wish we had more satellite data too, small satellite data too, and we're actively trying to find some. And I think soon we can probably add a few more data points to this. Now, I get this question a lot. Gizmo, I don't really think is applicable at all to CubeSats, okay? So I wouldn't go down to that range. I wouldn't go down below 36 kilograms. I think that'd be too much of extrapolation. Okay, so the database. We compiled small satellite cost and technical database from several sources, and I've listed them there. And then the fourth or fifth bullet down says, and let's just say other sources for a handful of small satellites that either have recently flown or in the latter stages of development for which Galrath has been involved. And for proprietary reasons and sensitivity reasons, I'm not going to say who those owners of satellites and developers are. But in all, we have the N equals 67 that I've mentioned. Now, as it turns out, the Gizmo database appears to be pretty similar to the aerospace SSCM database, except we've added that handful of new small satellites. And I'm sure our normalizations are different from aerospace, not better, but just different. You know, cost estimators and cost estimating organizations approach that differently. But I think the database is sort of similar. And I mentioned that really, I'm not saying something that's on, I'm just going to say something that's not on the chart here, and that is that I was kind of relieved to see that the SSCM has some really old data points in it too, because a number of my 67 data points here are rather old missions. So I was happy to see aerospace was sort of, I'm doing air quotes here, was forced to, you know, pick up some of those older missions too. Now we take Gizmo down to the subsystem level. We had to impute that for 18 of the 67 data points. 18 of them did not go to the subsystem level, but we used at least one form of imputation to do that. There's various ways to do imputation, and Christian is actually an expert on that. I may get his help. He and I have talked about him helping me do it in a more sophisticated way than we've so far done. But we managed to get all 67 data points down to the subsystem level, and I should say for the bus. The chart doesn't say that. For the bus. For the payload, we're still at the payload level. So that's one of the things we hope to improve in this model in the future, get the payload down to a lower level. All right, so we elected to use the NASA work breakdown structure. Many of you are probably familiar with it. It's shown here in this graphic. So our database includes all the NASA WBS elements except WBS-H, which is launch costs. We're not covering that with this model, but we're covering everything else. And then we add what we call a quote-unquote WBS-12, which is operations, the mission operations and data analysis phase of the mission, also called phase E and sometimes called phase E/F by NASA. So we estimate that because we had the data to do that, and that's not really part of the NASA work breakdown structure. Now, lots of times you'll see users of the NASA WBS hang their operations cost on either WBS-7 or WBS-9. But and that's fine. But we like to keep mission operations and data analysis totally separate because there is non-recurring costs associated with WBS-7 and 9. So I don't want to mix non-recurring and recurring. So think of ops in this model as WBS-12. Now we estimate WBS-5 and 6 with CERs, and I'll be showing you how we do that in a minute. And then we're using a multiplicative factor for percent new design, and you'll see that. Then all other WBS elements on this graphic, on this chart, or in the NASA WBS are estimated as a percent of WBS-5 plus WBS-6. So project management, system engineering, safety and mission assurance, all those things are estimated as a percent, where the percentages came from the Gizmo database. So it's sort of like a sales tax, percent markup. Okay, the CER structure, as implemented by Gizmo, the NASA work breakdown structure implies there are 44 cost numbers needed. And where am I getting that? Well, it's those 44 blue cells in that table to the right there. So it'd be 22, except for the fact we're separately accounting for development and DDT&E and the theoretical first unit. So that doubles the number of blue cells. But that the 44 number includes all those things that are calculated with percentages I just mentioned, project management, system engineering, and so forth. Wherever you see a percent in that table on the right, our CER is simply a percentage relationship. And there's a few roll-ups in there too. And then the 16 cells that have the word CER1 or CER2 in them are the 16 CERs that we generated with regression analysis as enumerated in that table. Okay, so one more word on TFU. Gizmo estimates the theoretical first unit cost, but includes a learning and rate curve capability if you're buying larger quantities or, you know, like a constellation mission or something. I'm not going to really cover that today, though. All right, let's look at an example scatter plot. This is a scatter plot of the bus development cost versus mass and transformed logarithms. So you can see there's a lot of scatter in that data in that database at this top level of the bus. And you can also see a CER, a regression CER underneath the chart. Down the very bottom right-hand corner, you see the R-squared adjusted is 29%. So that's not very good. So mass, therefore, is explaining only 30%, well, 29% of the variability in cost. So this R-squared is normally is less than what we normally observe when we use mass as a driver. Normally, mass only, in my experience, explains 50% or 60% of the variability in cost all by itself. But it's not doing that in the small sat regime. So this suggests that maybe that mass is not as strong a cost driver for small sats. Thus, the need to introduce other independent variables to try to explain the cost, and also the need to go down to the subsystem level, both of which Gizmo does, and we'll be talking about that. So here's a table of all the independent variables that we attempted, and why this list, there's 28 independent variables on this in this table. And this is based on our experience of building cost models in the past. So these independent variables, or the 28 variables here, are things that we have seen work well in the past. There's some more that there's probably a dozen others that we can use. We have a little bit more time to work on this model. So I just want to go through them fairly quickly here so that you get the lay of the land. Number one there is a total payload sweet dry mass. We wanted to try that in the regression analysis. And if it worked, which that one did, I put a check mark over there in the regression outcome column. So total payload sweet dry mass works pretty well to explain costs. Total bus dry mass also worked. The subsystem levels that you see below that for structures, thermal control, electrical power, comm and data handling, and GNC and reaction control system, 2 through 8 in this table, those all worked. Regression analysis was happy to use the subsystem level masses in the CERs. Electrical power did work in the electrical power system CER, the electrical power output of the bus, and I chose to use beginning of life, and this is in watts, obviously. And that worked. Lots of times in my experience, I've seen electrical power work in some other subsystems as well, like comm and payloads. But in the small sat world, so far, I've only gotten the wattage to work in the electrical power subsystem of the bus. So it's in there in that one subsystem. Another one that I've used in the past in some other models is deployed arrays. This is a dummy variable. Deployed arrays, yes or no. And so if you say no, you're really implying to the model that your arrays are body mounted. But this failed the t-test, and every way I tried to use it, it failed the t-test, where it often works in models that are looking at larger satellites. Radioactive thermal generators, RTGs, there are not any that have flown yet, to my knowledge, on small sats, but I know that there are small sats out there that look forward to using those some days, and there are organizations out there working on small RTGs. And so just as kind of a reminder, I put it on this chart, so when those become available, I'd like to try to get it in the model. But right now, I had no data points that had RTGs, so that variable is not really in the model. Phase CD duration, which is how long does the development program last, that failed the t-test. The number of distinct instrument types on the spacecraft, on the small satellite spacecraft, failed the t-test. Often that works. I've seen that work in other regimes, but not for small sats for some reason. What did work is a dummy variable that asked, does the payload have active instruments, yes or no? And that passed. That came into the model in a lot of the CERs. It was a good variable. 3-axis stabilized, yes or no, where no would imply a spinner or a gravity gradient satellite or a tumbler. Should have tumbling because some small sats just tumble. Well, CubeSats do. I'm not sure about small sats. But anyway, that failed the t-test. It didn't come in where it comes in some other models that have been worked in years past. Number of comm bands, and I've listed the possible VHF, UHF, and so on there. The number of communication bands has worked in some other models that I'm familiar with, but there were too many gaps in the database that I have right now to use this. I'm still researching the satellites I have to try to get this variable in the future. Here's a new variable that we're calling fidelity, and Christian actually suggested this. He did not use that name, but the first time he saw this model a few weeks ago, he said, "Hey, you need something in there that measures the quality of the product." And I said, "Oh, you mean something like class A, B, C, D?" And yeah, that's the idea. So when I tinker with it a little bit, I end up using something called fidelity, and it's two dummy variables. If the model asks you, are the specifications lower than nominal fidelity? If you say yes to that, then the model says, oh, okay, I'm going to use low fidelity. If you say, if that's not the case, you should say no to that variable and go to the next one. Are the specifications higher than nominal? If you say yes there, it uses a high fidelity dummy variable value. But if you say no to that, if you say no to both of these, the model then assumes, oh, the user must be trying to tell me it's nominal fidelity. So there's really three settings there, but you have to use two dummy variables to get all three of them. TCS complexity is something kind of new, yes or no. This worked pretty well for small sats for reasons. What do I mean by TCS complexity, thermal control complexity? Well, if the TCS system had deployable sun shields, or stationary or deployable radiators, or movable louvers, or heat pipes, or any of the other things listed there on the table, then I scored it as a complex TCS system, and if not, I scored it as a not complex, and that came in as a good dummy variable. Number 20, does the spacecraft have a reaction control system, yes or no? And then if you say yes to that, then you have the opportunity to tell it what kind. There's four kinds that it has now. The ones listed there: coal gas, monoprop, biprop, and electric. Unfortunately, coal gas is not yet working. It failed the t-test. So when you flip the switch in this model between coal gas, yes or no, it doesn't have any effect on cost. Still working on that, but the others are working. Destination, is it planetary or Earth orbital? Is it planetary? Yes or no? That worked. In most CERs, that worked. Is a good variable. Design life, surprisingly to me, failed the t-test. That's worked in a lot of other models. Expected launch date is a proxy for the technology marching on. That's worked in a lot of models I've developed over the years, I've been involved in over the years, and it did work here today in this model too. It's bringing costs down by about 1% a year, which is about what I've seen go on with other models when you put a variable like this in. Software lines of code, too many gaps in the database. I do not have SLOC in there yet, but it's in the cost. It's just embedded in the cost. Okay, the regression analysis and example CER. Regression was done with Minitab. I'm fond of Minitab, kind of an industrial strength stat package. Continuous variables were log transformed. Things like mass and power, I log transformed those. Common practice, of course, including that variable I just talked about, years since 1960, to control for the state of the art. A number of dummy variables were used. I've already mentioned them, including one called fidelity, and which is similar mission class. I already covered that. And that accounts for rigor in requirements, reviews, testing, documentation, and so forth. I developed a new way to account for percent new design. At least I think it's new. I'll show you that in a moment. The average R-square adjusted for all the CERs, the 16 CERs that are in Gizmo, the average DT&E CER R-squared is 68%. That's not so bad. It's probably a little less than I would hope for, a little bit less than I've seen in other models, but I think it's acceptable. I'm not yet happy with that TFU of 50%, but that's what it is today. All the independent variables have a t-test P equals 0.1 or lower, so I cut it off at that point. Now, I'm actually lying to you, because if you look at this structure CER and you follow that red arrow, you'll see that RCS came in at 0.106. So I let that slide, okay? But that's one of the few ones that I thought RCS, the absence or not of RCS, should be a structural cost driver. And so that CER there you see is a structural cost driver for DT&E structure. So I left RCS in. It's close enough. And the R squared on this CER for structures is pretty good. You see it there at the bottom of that table. It's 75.9%. I used, to get these CERs, I used a manual stepwise regression in Minitab. That's what I always do, trying one variable at a time and then introducing others. I already said that I said an acceptable t-test limit was 0.1, but mostly the t-values are much better than that. In fact, on that previous chart, you may have noticed all the other p-values in those parameters were very good. I also checked for sensible algebraic signs on the independent variables. If you have a backwards algebraic sign, that's not good. You can argue about that, but I just don't like to see that, so I don't include a variable if it's got the wrong algebraic sign. I think that's too confusing, even though statistically it's working somehow. I also look to make sure that the engineering logic behind the independent variables makes sense to me. Several times a variable would creep in with pretty good looking statistics, but it really didn't make sense, so I threw it out. And a good example of that, or one example of that, was avionics redundancy. In the RCS CER had great stats, but I didn't see why avionics redundancy should drive RCS. And there were a few surprises. I've already mentioned design life was pretty stubborn, wouldn't pass any of the t-test. Median design life in our database was 29 months, but didn't have much variability, so maybe that's what's causing that. Power worked, rarely worked. It worked for EPS at least, as I've already mentioned. The median watts in this database is pretty low, 224 watts, which all satellites, if you look at all satellites, the median watts is more like 850. So these are small sats and they have small power subsystems, so not a lot of variability there either. So that's probably why they didn't work. Planetary would not go in with the regularity I would hope, but I only have 6 planetary spacecraft in this database. So I need to find more beyond Earth orbit small sats, and I'm chasing those to try to get into the database. So I've already mentioned the narrow range of some of these continuous independent variables may be affecting whether or not they come into the regression successfully or not. Some flaws, we're badly overfit, I admit that, with 67 data points and 21 independent variables. We're overfit. We should have double or triple the number of data points, or maybe even more. Christian has suggested I do some cross-validation to work on that. I haven't had time, but we'll do that with his help sometime in the future. Our median y-hats are biased a little bit low. That's easy to correct by tinkering around with the A value, but I just hadn't bothered yet. It's kind of where you kind of want to do that last. Our payload CER is too simplistic. It's a total payload. It's not sensitive to what kind of instruments are on board the spacecraft, which is a pretty terrible flaw. Seer Space does a much better job of that. Seer Space has a rich selection of types of instruments, and so I need to go in that direction. All right, finally, I mentioned I did percent new design differently, so here's that. Would be interested in hearing if anyone else has approached it this way. So percent new design, which is really the mathematical complement of heritage, okay, has always been, in my mind, a vexing issue in cost analysis. It's usually the single most potent cost driver quite often, but simultaneously it has some other characteristics, heritage that aren't so good. Heritage is almost always overstated in the early design phases of a project, and then even worse, as that project keeps on going through its life cycle and heritage erodes, they usually don't get around to actually documenting what the final heritage was. It's poorly documented. Now, most cost models do include, though, despite these flaws, the percent new design as an input. So usually, in my experience at least, to do that, to include percent new design, requires that the historical data points in the model database be tagged with an estimate of what their percent new design was. Well, that's a lot of work and a lot of trouble. And so I took a shortcut here. In Gizmo, we implemented this new approach. We are asserting, I'm using the word asserting there, quite on purpose, we're asserting that the average percent new design in the Gizmo database are the red font numbers in that table over there in the top right-hand corner. So 70% for payload, 70% for the bus structures and mechanism, 40% for the bus TCS, and so on. Those red numbers in the top right. Where did those come from? This is just based on our experience. Our experience says that typically those are the percent new designs for spacecraft that we have seen in the past, and so we're just asserting those are good. And you might notice that it results in a weighted average bus percent new design of 50.3% there. So then when the user specifies their percent new design in the model input, the bottom table factors factor that input to make it relative to the percent new design that's already embedded in the CERs. So if someone comes along and says, let's take thermal control, for example, in the bottom table. A user says, my percent new design is 50%. He hits his fist on the table. Okay, he or she. Well, the model says to itself, oh, you know what? The database average was already 40%, and he's above that. So he's really saying that his percent new design is 125%. So sort of behind the scenes, the model uses that 125%. It's really not behind the scenes. It's obvious to the user that's what's going on. But so that's how we're doing percent new design, and all this, doing it this way precludes us having to do the red font step above for all the data points in the database. So I hope that was clear. So here's the example IO of the model. Total payload suite dry mass is the first input. And I'm also showing there in the middle column of the database median value. So I've just put the medians in here for this sample run here. So 54 kilograms for the payload suite. The 163 is really a summation. The database average is 183, but because I'm using the median values for each of the subsystems, structures 62, thermal control 5, and so on, that really adds up to 163. And so that's why there's a little bit of difference between 163 and 183. So all the subsystems in, you input the dry mass, and you input the percent new design over there on the right-hand side of this first table. And I'm using the default values here, just for example. Design life is on the table, but it's shaded, is in the input, but it's shaded out. I'm still working on getting that to work, as I've already mentioned. So the 29 months that is the median average. Our database is there, but it's not really being used. The electrical power is 224 watts. The expected launch date, I put in the 1998, which is the average age of our database, of our data points, which, as I've already mentioned, yes, some of these data points are pretty old. Number of instruments is a shade out because it's not in the model yet. Does the payload have active instruments? Yes or no. Are the specs lower than nominal fidelity? Yes or no. Are the specifications higher than nominal fidelity? Yes or no. Is it planetary or not? What's the TCS complexity? Does the spacecraft have propulsion? If so, what kind? And number 21 there are avionics single string. So if you say yes to that, it gives you a lower cost number. If you say no, it assumes that the avionics uses a dummy variable to increase the cost to a higher than single string result. So the results that come out of these particular inputs are shown over there on the right. So it's saying that this small sat, if you don't go into the bottom of this table, it's saying this small sat is $112.27 million. Not that all those digits are significant. And it breaks it out against the work breakdown structure, as I've already mentioned. Mission operations is that line WBS 12. So mission operations and data analysis is being estimated by the model as $10.27 million. And then because my mind thinks in terms of annual mission operations and data analysis, the model output calculates that down there in the very last row, the 4.25. I like to have that number handy because I'll tell you that for most spacecraft missions, the annual MO and DA as a function of the rest of the cost, as a percentage of the rest of the cost, varies around, it's usually about 3, 4, 5, 6, 7%, somewhere in that range. So you can see that 4.25, is about 4%, or a little bit less of the 112. So that's kind of a little check mark in my brain. Says, oh yeah, that looks reasonable. If I got a number down there that was 15% of the 112 million, I would say, why is that? Look into that. So that's why that's there. Okay, so some sensitivities to some of the inputs. First, those that seem reasonable. If you flip on that low fidelity switch to low, it lowers the cost to 51% of nominal. That seems right to me. It's the right direction. Seems about right, and that's what this data is saying. Okay, so you flip it to high, it bumps the cost up to 2.4 of nominal fidelity. And again, this has to do with the number of reviews you're having, the documentation, all that sort of stuff. So those numbers seem reasonable to me. Planetary, turning that to yes, causes a 1.34 plus up. That's the kind of thing I've seen in other models, somewhere in the 30, 40, 50% range for the plus up for planetary. By the way, I'll call it planetary to me is either going to an actual planet or to the asteroid belt. Lagrange destinations seem to be more birds of a feather with Earth orbital. So I don't use, it's Lagrange, I use Earth orbital as a setting. If it's going to moon, that's a little bit problematic. So I think a lunar destination is somewhere between, in terms of cost, somewhere between Earth orbital and beyond Earth orbit or planetary. I probably should put a setting in the model for a special setting in there for lunar. I had too few data points though right now to do that. Electric propulsion turned out to be less expensive than biprop. That was surprising to me. It comes in at 41% of biprop. That may be okay. It seems a little optimistic, but I finally let it go and left it in there for now. Going to single strain avionics lowers the cost of avionics, where avionics is guidance, navigation, control, communications, and command and data handling, and electrical power system. Those three subsystems are often called avionics. So if you flip to single strain avionics, you get a cost at 61% of if you turn single strain off. If you turn single strain off, the model assumes you got more redundancy in your avionics. It also lowers the total cost by 61%, but it lowers TCS, thermal control system, also happens to, because that variable was happily in the TCS CER, avionics redundancy is. So that lowers the TCS cost to 59% of what you would get if you did not turn it to single strain. Going from monoprop to biprop is a 1.62 upper. That's typical. That's what I've seen before. So that seems okay. Now for some that we're still working on. If you tell it as an active instrument, tell the model to assume active instrument, that doubles the bus cost. Well, I don't see why that's right. I mean, active instruments are, require a lot more stuff of the bus, but I don't think it should double the bus cost. That's what it's doing right now. I've got to work on that a little bit more. Active instruments also causes a 2.7x effect on payload suite costs. I think that's also too potent. Just by the way, I had 10 data points out of the 67 that had active instruments. Active instruments, by the way, are radars and lasers, laser-driven and radar-driven instruments that transmit those LiDAR and radar out from the spacecraft, as opposed to sensing incoming photons. Okay, so TCS complexity is a 1.73 plus up. That sounds a little too potent to me. Coal gas, as already mentioned, didn't make the t-test cut. I've got to work on that. So when the user selects coal gas right now, it has no effect. Okay, so some concluding remarks on Gizmo, and this is just my opinion. The true test of a cost model, more so than all the statistics and so forth, is just, does it really work in the field? Does it give results that seem reasonable, and does it give you wacky results? Well, since we're overfit, we are getting a few wacky results, as I mentioned a while ago. Well, overfitting could be the reason. It could be other reasons as well. I'm sure overfitting is contributing to some outlandish sensitivities. So we plan to answer the question as we use the model on some real satellites in the field and continue to improve Gizmo for our future use. Now, if you have a small satellite that you'd like me to try Gizmo out on with a cost estimate, I'll be happy to talk to you about it. So there's good old Duke Ellington there. So he said, when music sounds good, it is good. So what I'm telling you is when a cost model works, it's good. Okay, finally, as a matter of possible interest, a co-author, a colleague of mine named Aaron Zuckerman, who is a small spacecraft researcher and technologist and a PhD candidate in system engineering at Cornell University. He and I are working on a small sat cost estimating paper to be presented at the 2021 NASA Cost and Schedule Analysis Symposium. There's the announcement of that symposium link on the screen, and the dates of the symposium in the box there. If you're interested in registering and attending that symposium, it's usually very excellent. Okay, winding down here, we also just happened to have developed a similar model recently with GalRath. We developed, for several DoD customers, we recently developed a high-level parametric cost model for hypersonic vehicles. It can be used in a very early design phase prior to being sufficient information to run something like the SEER models, okay? So the model estimates the 3 parts of a hypersonic vehicle, actually 4 parts if you count the scramjet engine. But anyway, the solid rocket booster to get it up in Mach 5, and then hypersonic vehicles can either be gliders or they can use scramjet engines, and they're called thrust glide in that case. So this model estimates those 3 parts and has a dummy variable to turn on and off the scramjet engine capability. The model can be used to independently estimate the cost of proposed or new or adapted boosters and hypersonic vehicles, and or use it to sanity check contractor estimates. So if you're interested, I'm happy to set up a Zoom meeting with you and show you this hypersonic vehicle cost model. And there in the box on the right is an example CER for the body, the glide body or thrust glide body. So final word here, GalRath is a 75-person company dedicated to providing our customers with best practice cost analysis. We have all the skill sets listed there in that list, and some others I'm sure they're not there. You can take a look at us at galrath.com, or you can contact me directly at jhammaker@galrath.com. Okay, so thank you very much for this opportunity.
Well, thanks, Joe. It's so far we haven't gotten any questions from anyone, but we still have a few moments if any folks want to send some. Thank you for mentioning the ICEA online workshop for 2021. That's going to be May 17 through 20. It's a whole new world out there, so it's a little different format, but we've made a lot of little edits and changes as to the schedule and the layout and how it's going to work so that it'll fit well into your new normal or maybe not normal schedule as it has come. Christian, do you want to say anything in closing from the Alabama chapter?
Yes, and I just want to mention about the workshop. One of the nice things about it is even if you have other things you have to do during that time, if you sign up, you can view the recordings for some period of time after that. So it's a nice feature that you wouldn't have in the past, is being able to go back and watch things that you missed, or watch it multiple times if you find something interesting, but and you want to get more information about it. So it's a nice feature this year, is having that, and you can watch those recordings at any time that you want. So on your own schedule. So that's a pretty nice thing. Don't have to travel anywhere. Do it from the comfort of your own home. I know we're probably all a little sick of being at home, but you do have that luxury. The other thing I want to mention is we'll try to do another one of these meetings in April. We probably won't do one in May. People get sick of all the virtual meetings, and I think we'll have a lot of virtual meetings in May with the workshop, which is a great opportunity. But we don't want to saturate you. And then tentatively, we're kind of would like to have a in-person one-day workshop, the Huntsville chapter, the Greater Alabama chapter in Huntsville. This fall. Hopefully things will continue to go well with the vaccine and the decrease in COVID cases, and that's kind of tentatively planned for this fall. So that's pretty much all I have. Thanks again, Joe, for giving an excellent talk, and we'll try to have another one of these meetings next month.
All right. Thanks. Oh wait, looks like we got one. Hold on. Oh, come on. All right. Dustin, in the interest of speed, I'm just going to get ready to unmute you. So I hope you can take care of that. You can unmute yourself. We're ready when you are.
Hey, Joe, it's Dustin. I just wanted to know how you would recommend combining this with another tool like SeerSpace to model payload. to ensure that the system level integration costs are calculated correctly?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I would estimate, ideally use a number of models if the including SEER H as well as SEER space, if the small sat has been defined to a level to use SEER H. Probably it has. Probably a lot of small sats have not gotten to that point yet, and you have to use SEER space, which is fine. We've successfully used SEER space on several small sats, as Dustin, as you know, because you helped me do it. The system level cost should be pretty close between SEER space and Gizmo, because we're using the NASA WBS and calculating the system level cost from that database. There is I do have a separate, if anyone is interested, I have a separate algorithm. I have a separate procedure that shows you how to extract from a SEER space run, how to extract the NASA work breakdown structure integration factors, WBS 1, 2, 3, 4, and so forth. So if anybody would be interested in it's a spreadsheet. So if anybody wants to have that tool, let me know. Dustin, did I answer your question?
Yes.
All right, well, we did record today's session, and we will put Joe's slides up on the Greater Alabama page on the ICEA website. Joe, if you had anything else you wanted to put up there, just send it on over. We'll put it up for everybody. But I think, since no other questions came in during that answer, I think we are good to go with 12 minutes left. I'm sure everybody's got another one at the top of the hour. So thank you from ICEA. Christian, if you want to close it out for us?
Yes, thanks everyone for attending. Yeah, so if you want to look at Joe's slides, they'll be on the website under the Greater Alabama page. So thanks everyone for your participation. We'll do this again next month.